theme for this month is "It Works." Affirmative prayer. You have to say it with the exclamation point. It works. And all the previous speakers this month have addressed affirmative prayer, which we also call scientific prayer. That was one of Ernest Holmes' words for it, or spiritual mind treatment, or just treatment. And each of them addressed it in a different way. When Randy Granger was here, he reminded us that Ernest Holmes says that when you do an affirmative prayer or any prayer work, you have to make sure that you get the feeling of it, that the feeling is essential. And so I'm going to address that when I go through my ideas about affirmative prayer. Now, all the other speakers have taught what is taught in the classes, that there are 5 steps to an affirmative prayer. And I've been to a lot of the classes, a number of times, and each time you gain a little bit more insight, hopefully, into what's going on with this. And it occurred to me that a complete description of what's going on with affirmative prayer actually has 7 parts, not just the 5 that everybody else has spoken about. So I'm going to address that, and with each part, I believe there is a different feeling that's associated with it. So that feeling that's essential, it moves along from step to step. So, the 7 parts. The first part of an affirmative prayer, and if you take a class, you get homework to write a treatment, and you have the 5 steps, but above all that, you have the intention. What is it that you're praying about? What are you treating for? So, before you can do anything else, you have to get your intention straight. That's the first part. And when you do that, as Ernest Holmes and many others say, you ought to be specific. Not to the point of micromanaging the thing, but specific enough so that you know whether or not you're going to get it, It's like, well, if you just say you want something, well, okay, here's something. That's not quite enough detail. What is it that you'd be feeling? What is it that you'd be seeing here? What is it that you'd be doing if this prayer was effective? And if you don't have that feeling of, yeah, that's it, that's what I want, then you go back and you cycle through. And if you're working with a practitioner or somebody else, then you make sure that you both have that feeling, okay, we've got it defined now, we know what it is that we're praying about. So that's that first feeling of certainty that you know what you're doing, that you know what you're having it about. Now I want to say another little thing about it, and that's when you're doing an affirmative prayer or a spiritual mind treatment, you have to make sure that you're not praying that something that has already happened, something that already isn't. That's not what you can do with an affirmative prayer. And the tricky thing is, sometimes something has already happened, but you don't know yet, and so you're praying about it. Like one of the examples that I saw in another book on prayer is, let's say you're out shopping or something and you hear that a house in your neighborhood is on fire. Well, you don't do an affirmative prayer for it not to be your house. Well, for a couple of reasons. First of all, you're effectively praying that somebody else's house is on fire. But also because whichever house is on fire. Your prayer won't change that. You don't know which house it is, and so for you it's not certain, but it already is determined. Or let's say you get a letter in the mail, and you know it's either going to have good news or bad news. Well, you can't, again, whatever's in the letter is in the letter. You can't change that with your prayer, even though you don't know, you haven't opened up the envelope yet. What you can do an affirmative prayer for is how you're going to respond to whatever is in the letter. That is something you can address with a treatment, but not what's in the letter. That's out of your hands, even though the letter's in your hands. Never mind. That's not what I meant. So once you've got that affirmative prayer clear, and you know that it's appropriate, then the next thing you go on to is a step that's called recognition. Now, with recognition, what is it that you're recognizing? Well, you're recognizing spirit. You're recognizing God, the infinite, the absolute, the thing itself, whatever you want to call it.
and you recognize it as being everywhere, in and as everywhere, and in and as everything. And what Ernest Holmes tries to make clear, well, he makes it clear whether we get it or not, is he'll say in some of his talks, all the power and all the presence is right here between my fingers, wherever I put my fingers. It's all everywhere. Now, I don't know, 9 or 10 years ago, one of the first messages I ever gave here was actually about that step of recognition. The entire message was just on that one step, and you can certainly do more than one message on each step. That was, let's say, 8 or 9 years ago. There was only an audio tape for it, but if people are interested, I can get the audio to Randy, and he can put it up on the YouTube. And in that, I addressed the feeling of that step. And the feeling is really a combination of two things. One is, okay, you're going to be recognizing spirit. You're going to be recognizing all that power and everything. What's the feeling that you get when you're in the presence of whichever attribute is appropriate to the intention that you have? Or it could be, multiple ones. It could be when you're just in some awe-inspiring, in the presence of something awe-inspiring, or in the presence of great love, or whichever is appropriate. So what's the feeling you get for that? But also, what's the feeling you get when you recognize something? That recognition that turns out, so, hey, that's Bob. What does that feel like? And you combine those two feelings, and again, you may have to work with it, and then you get that feeling associated with that recognition, and the closer you get to that feeling and the more you feel it, the more effective you're going to be. Now, it follows from if spirit is everywhere and is everything, it's also each thing, and so it's me, it's you, it's each of us. So the next step is called unification. Ernest Holmes sometimes calls it identification, and I think it's useful to think of it as both those things. Unification, okay, it's all one, I am one with this thing itself, but also identification. My identity is this thing itself. And if you're working with somebody else, that other person's identity is the thing itself, and therefore unified with the other person as well. So what's that feel like? What's the feeling of being this thing? Well, what does it feel like to be you? What's that kind of feeling? And then throw in that feeling from just before of recognition. You recognize you're it. You recognize the other person, if you're working with another person, is it. So that's the feeling you get with that unification/identification. Now, the next step is called realization. And with realization, Ernest Holmes sometimes calls that declaration, because you're declaring that something is so. And the feeling that you get, you ought to be getting when you're declaring that, is that you're not lying. That something really is so, that you have that conviction that it really is the case. And so, again, with each of these things, you may have to cycle through. You may have to change what it is you're saying. If you can't believe those words, don't try to just convince yourself by repeating them. Shift the meaning of them a little bit until they are congruent with your belief, until you're convinced of it. And also, of course, that they jibe with that intention that's been set. So that's the feeling you get, the feeling of conviction, the feeling of, yes, I know this is true. Now, Ernest Holmes will sometimes just have one more step after that, which he will call, I believe, acceptance. And we break it up into two, the first one of which is thanksgiving. And I want to say a little bit about that. In Thanksgiving, there's something tricky that you have to make sure you're doing. And that's this. When you're thanking, and the foundation classes make this clear, you're being thankful for this thing that you've just realized, but you're not thankful to something outside of yourself, because you've just gone through all this trouble of identifying yourself as that. You just unified with it, so you don't want to lapse into duality again by being thankful to something outside. You want to make sure you're staying in that unity, in that identification as you're doing that. So what's the feeling associated with Thanksgiving? Well, it's gratitude, and you know what that feels like. But I really want to get into a little bit more. Think about when you were a little kid, and you got a present, and it was all wrapped up, and you unwrap it, and it's something that you really, really, really wanted, right? Really wanted. Now, you will, at a certain point, say, oh, thank you to whoever gave it to you. But before that, when you opened it up, that feeling, that, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, that's the feeling that goes with that Thanksgiving. And again, the more powerfully you feel that, the more effective the prayer will be. And the last one after that is called release. And to me, release is something really short, really simple. You just let go. Now, I know that sometimes you're taught to say, now I release this into the law for it to perform its blah, 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 blah. No, it's not. There's too much going on. You don't do that. The feeling of release, the feeling is much shorter than that. It's when you mail a letter, you release it. And then you don't say, I leave this letter now in the system of the postal system for it to be delivered. No, you're done with it at that point. You don't even, it's out. You're on to the next thing. You know, when you send an email, same deal, right? You hit send. You don't say, I release this now into the internet for all the servers to. You hit send and you're done. So that's what release is. You hit send and you're done. You know, you're on to the next thing. Now, before I go on to the last part, the seventh part of an affirmative prayer, I do want to backtrack a little because I really should have said this earlier. When you're going through the first two steps after the intention, when you're going through that, what you're really looking to do is to establish a connection with all that power and all that presence. You know, if you have a keyboard and you have a computer and you're typing away and the keyboard isn't connected to the computer, it really doesn't matter what beautiful and wonderful and powerful things you're typing. This is typing, this is playing a piano. You're typing, nothing's going to happen. You're not connected. So you have to make that connection. Okay, the last part of an affirmative prayer, the seventh part, is the demonstration. It's having the thing come about that you wanted to have. That's the proof of the pudding is in the eating, as they say. I've been reading a number of books about fiction writing, and most of those books will tell you at the beginning of a story, the writer makes a promise to the reader, and at the end of the story, the writer fulfills that promise. That's what the demonstration is. It's fulfilling the promise when you set the intention. And it really ought to match. The affirmation for this month is affirmative prayer works every time. And I have to say I have an issue with that statement for a number of reasons. One is, as you heard, I like to keep the science in religious science. And so that's not just bringing thoughts about other sciences into it, but making sure that religious science, as it's taught, as we think of it, fulfills the criteria of what a science is. As Ernest Holmes says, we need that sign, we need that proof, otherwise we don't know if somebody's just dreaming. And the criteria is that for a science, one of the bedrock criteria is that it be falsifiable. What does that mean? It means that any science will make some predictions. Any theory, any scientific theory will make some predictions. And if, when you do an experiment, this ought to happen. And if you do the experiment and this doesn't happen, well, it's possible you didn't do the experiment correctly. But if you did do it correctly and it didn't happen, then there's something off about the theory. You have to adjust it. There used to be a theory of combustion called phlogiston theory. about things that burn have this thing called phlogiston in it. And later on, when people discovered, no, it's really combining with oxygen, that whole theory was thrown out. Other theories just have to be adjusted. In the 18th century, started having the modern theory of atoms, the modern atomic theory. And over time, okay, there are atoms, but we have to think of them this way. And then as we do other experiments, and these experiments all came out right, but that one not, so we have to adjust it again. And so atomic theory got revised, got improved over time. And so that's what a science has to be capable of improving over time, and of having the new technologies occur as we learn what it's about. Otherwise, if you say it works every time, you're more or less saying it's meaningless. There's no way to prove or disprove anything about it. No way to test it. It's kind of like when you shoot an arrow and it lands anywhere, and then you paint the bullseye where it landed. And you can always say, yes, I hit the bullseye, but no, you didn't. You painted the target. You painted the bullseye when you set the intention. That's where the bullseye is. That's where the target is. And if the demonstration is, well, it's kind of somewhere in the target, but not the bullseye, okay, you know that some things have to be adjusted. If it doesn't even hit the target, then you know that maybe you got to go back and refigure what it is you're doing. Now, I'm not the only person who said, and that's good. That's how you're learning. If it doesn't come about as you set your intention, okay, what do I have to do differently? And I'm not the only person who has said that. Emmett Fox, one of the foremost New Thought teachers, in a book called Make Your Life Worthwhile, has an essay called, Are You Fooling Yourself? And here's what he says in that. He says, this teaching really changes things. It makes the life history of the individual utterly different from what it would have been without it. And naturally, that is the test. He calls what's going on that in your life that you're praying about or doing a treatment about, he calls that the outer picture. He says, we understand that by turning away from the negative picture to positive truth and holding to that truth in consciousness, we heal the picture. The picture changes. And that is the case, and that is the test. That is the test. He has that in italics. If the outer picture changes in the direction of your intention, you are working rightly. You're not fooling yourself or indulging in emotional dissipation. If the outer picture does not change in a reasonable time, you are fooling yourself. You are not working rightly and should revise your method. As with, whenever a theory isn't coming out right, you have to maybe change the technology that you're basing it. The theory is good, and something you built doesn't work. You may have to change what you built, even though the theory is correct. So, change your method. The outer change may be incomplete or even comparatively small as yet, but as long as the outer picture is changing, again in italics, and of course in the direction of your intention, you are not fooling yourself, you are getting results. Here's a statement I love. He has this in italics too. There are no invisible demonstrations. When you demonstrate something, you're showing it. Again, it's that sign that you're going in the right direction. In Hebrew, in the Hebrew Bible, the word that's translated as sign is also translated as miracle. They're the same word. And if you think about it, even the word miracle has that idea of showing something. Mira, look at over there. There's that sense of you have to be able to see it. Again, did it match your intention? Are you seeing, are you feeling, are you doing what you set out to do back when you set the intention? That's the test, as he says. He says, excuses, prevarications, any kind of self-deception are idle when we know that the outer picture tells the tale and that there is no appeal from it. Ernest Holmes says something very similar in The Science of Mind. he has a section called Let Us Not Fool Ourselves. And he says this: the kind of demonstration we believe in is the kind that can be checked by a physician if one so desires. If we are treating for the removal of a cancer, we have not made a demonstration until the cancer is gone and the wholeness of the body is evident to anyone. This is not a process of saying peace when there is no peace. A practitioner working for one whose blood pressure is high might say, go every week or so and have your blood pressure tested. If one's blood pressure remains high, a demonstration will not have been made until it is reduced to normal. To claim that he is perfectly normal while the blood pressure remains high would be to affront the intelligence of any sane individual. While it is possible that we might have to work on a case for some time, there should be some sign of improvement from the first treatment. Now, I don't know how many people would be willing to take on that challenge that Ernest Holmes has laid down, that when you're working with the high blood pressure, you're not done, you don't have a demonstration until it's back to normal. And as Emmett Fox says, you can't make excuses. The proof is out there. You can't say, well, maybe it's for the highest good that their blood pressure remains high. No, you set your intention of having the blood pressure return to normal. That's when you make your demonstration. If you're treating the cancer, you can't say, well, maybe before they were born, they made an agreement to have this cancer and yada, yada. No. As Ernest Holmes says, your demonstration is made when it's gone. Now, that's a high bar. But that's the bar that Ernest Holmes, that religious science as a science, sets. No excuses, no pretending, no making believe. Nobody ever said, it's done unto you as you make believe. And also, although this is a little bit more subtle, no one said it's always done unto you as you believe. Like, as you sow, so shall you reap. Always, every time? No. As you sow, so shall you tend to reap. But remember the parable of the sower. Never mind what it's a parable for, just the parable itself, taken literally. A sower sows some seeds, sows them there, nothing happens. Sow some seeds there, they come up for a little while and then they die. Sow some seeds there and the weeds come up, which he didn't sow, but the weeds still come up. And so on and so forth until finally he sows it in the right place at the right time with the right nutrients and everything, and then it grows up. So that's the deal. This is why I say that the title of this message is, it works when you do it right. When you get the seeds in the right place and water them appropriately and give them the right nutrients and everything. So it's not just as you believe, it's as you believe and make sure you got everything, you're performing everything right, you're using the right technology in the right way of this science. Ernest Holmes, when speaking of it as a science, often compares it to electricity. He says, more or less, when you flip the switch, you expect the light to turn on. It's dependable, it's reliable, it's repeatable, all those things that a science has to be. Now, has anybody here ever turned on the switch and the light didn't go on? Yeah, sometimes something's off. You know, maybe the bulb is blown and you gotta replace the bulb. Maybe the circuit breaker has flipped and you have to reset the circuit breaker. Maybe there's something wrong with the switch and you gotta fix the switch. You know, maybe something's gotten wrong with the wiring in your house, like, you know, gerbils have eaten through the wiring or something, and you have to call an electrician to fix that. And in fact, when the house is being built, you don't wire it yourself unless you're an electrician. No, you get a licensed professional electrician to wire it for you. When Reverend Bonnie was here, she talked about working with a practitioner, a licensed professional practitioner. And you can make the analogy that they're there to put in the wiring for you, to connect the wires to the generator, to the source. But it's still your job, if you want to use the electricity, to plug things in so that you make that connection as well. You plug in your computer so you can use it. You plug in the lamp and put a light bulb in, and then flip the switch. That's your job. You're not done when you hand it over to a practitioner. They're just putting in the wiring for you. You have more work to do. Randy Granger was quoting Ernest Holmes when he said, "The answer to the prayer is in the prayer." And when I read that, I realize I can read it a slightly different way. The answer to the prayer is in the prayer. It's both. The answer's in you. The answer's in the prayer you're praying. But you have more work to do. Here's, again, Ernest Holmes. This is in How to Change Your Life. He says, "So the good that you have chosen and planted in the realm of cause requires definite action on your part. And it needs to be right action, too. God does for us what he does through us. Everything you can do objectively to promote this chosen good is, of course, what you are going to be doing. Anything less would be childish and infantile. You don't expect to get anything without paying the price for it. That price in the objective world usually consists of good work, systematic study, personal development, or any concrete action that is your part in this." I think that in the popular teachings about the law of attraction and the New Thought stuff, that gets left by the wayside a lot. And that's why a lot of people like that, and so they go along with it. And a lot of people think, well, you know, if you're saying that all you have to do is just repeat a mantra or do a treatment over and over again, or look at a collage or something and never get out of your house and do stuff, it can't be a right teaching. And it's not. What Ernest Holmes says is that's childish and infantile. You got to do your work too. Now, Reverend Bonnie said that she keeps a journal with the treatment that she does and then the demonstrations that come up. And you've heard, well, in the reading, there was your mind is a laboratory and your thoughts are the tools. And often you'll hear the phrase, "My life is a laboratory." When you're working in a laboratory, you keep a lab book, a lab notebook. And so as you do treatments, think of them as experiments. Write down in as much detail as you can so you can go back and check what was the intention in all the detail that you specified. How did I manage all these steps? What feelings did I actually get? And then after, as Emmett Fox says, after a reasonable time, if there's no demonstration, you write, "No demonstration. Something must have been off in the way I handled this technology. Let me do it again and try to vary it a little bit so it's a little bit more in keeping with the theory." And if you do have a demonstration, let's say you hit the target but not the bullseye. So you write that. Yeah, this happened, but not all of it. And that's the way you can learn to adjust the way you're doing a treatment, doing an affirmative prayer, so that they become more and more effective. And that's the way the science progresses as well. The science of religious science is seeing when it works better, when it works not as good, and maybe even varying what kind of, yes, you keep the same framework, you can keep the same structure of a treatment, but maybe you tweak it a little bit when you're treating for health and tweak it differently when you're treating for abundance, or another way for relationships or friendship. The same structure, but you got to tweak it. Again, you'll learn that if you keep a lab book. And so it is.